We're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. I am Juju Wellemeyer. I work for K-State Research and Extension in Johnson County. I know we have people from all over the state here tonight with us, which is super exciting. So I'm the natural resource and small mid-scale agriculture agent. I provide outreach, education, and resources that fall under those topics for residents. And I often do get questions from all over the state. So if you ever need anything from Extension, I always encourage people to look up their local Extension agency because they're typically a wealth of information that people don't know about. That cover a variety of topics from food safety and horticulture to natural resources and aging and even finance assistance. So tonight we are presenting creating backyards for birds. And one of my Extension Master Naturalist volunteers, Heather Schwach, is presenting tonight. Heather has always had an interest in the natural world, birds and gardening. Sorry, I'm getting weird feedback. All right, it's gone now. So Heather's always had an interest in the natural world, birds and gardening. Although she has been an avid gardener and feeder of birds for as long as she can remember, she did not become a bird lister or serious birder until about 10 years ago. Observing and photographing them in her yard, wildlife refuges and sanctuaries, and other natural surroundings are some of her favorite pastimes. She is a recent graduate of the class of the 2021 Johnson County Extension Master Naturalist Program. So, with that, we're going to go ahead and let Heather take it away. A few housekeeping items. Feel free to put any questions you have for us in the chat. We are going to hold off on answering those questions until the end of our presentation. And we are going to record this presentation and email it out to you guys afterwards. The last thing I have for you is I'm going to put a link into the chat. If you could take a few minutes to fill that out, it's actually demographics that we track from for Extension. It's something that the USDA asks us to track. It's anonymous. It's also optional, but it just makes sure that we're reaching a variety of audiences, and that's the only way that we can gather the information to do that. So I'm going to drop that link in the chat for you guys, and then when I email out the recording of this video, I will also send a survey so that we can get your feedback on how our programs are doing. So that's the housekeeping I have for you. And with that, Heather, you are free to take it away.
Thank you, Juju. So we're going to talk about gardens and a healthy birdhouse. How many of you enjoy waking up to the sweet sounds of birdsong in your yards every day? I like to have a leisurely cup of coffee and sit by a window where I can watch what I call my birds or my feathered friends as they enjoy my yard. I like to think they are enjoying the yard just as much as I enjoy them. I could be making it up and fantasizing. So how do you define a backyard bird habitat? A bird-friendly landscape should fulfill all of a wild bird's basic needs, including the food, shelter, water, and nesting sites that bird needs to be successful in its lifespan. Not just part of those, all of those gives it the ideal place. You want to create a welcoming home for them, and as an added bonus, you might get to watch them raise their bird families. Commonly nesting in our yards around here, we can see cardinals, doves, robins, wrens, some woodpeckers, some chickadees. Less common would be bluebirds. They're very habitat specific and picky. A backyard bird lister. Backyard bird lister is a way for you to kind of keep track of what you're seeing in your yard. And there's a couple different citizen science programs out there that can help you do that. or let you help science and ornithology around the North America or wherever you might be. eBird is an excellent one. If you watched the previous Silver Clovers presentation, they talked about eBird on there. That's an excellent, excellent resource. And I think Juju's got some links she's going to be dropping in the chat for people as to where to find these resources. And I think they're going to be available at the end of the night as well. It's the world's largest biodiversity related science project, with more than 100 million bird sightings contributed annually by eBirders around the world, and an average participation growth rate of approximately 20% year over year. So bird listing, birding in general is growing. eBird helps you keep track of what you've seen wherever you might be. It helps you guide you on what to look for wherever you might be. It's a collaborative enterprise with hundreds of partner organizations, thousands of regional experts, and hundreds of thousands of users. And it's managed by Cornell Lab of Ornithology. It's an excellent listing resource. Project Feeder Watch is another great way to kind of dip your toes in and watch the birds. That is a program that takes place, I believe, every fall up through spring. And that is a way for you to count the birds a certain time of the day, of the week, for a period of time, and kind of help globally gather information for citizen science on those birds. Merlin is another source. It's more of an educational source than a listing source, but it does help direct you on maybe what bird are you looking at. So the last Silver Clovers class talked about bird identification, and Merlin, I believe, was mentioned there, but it can help you if you have a mystery bird and you're not quite sure what it is. Bird books and journals, field guides. My favorite are the Stan Tequila field guides for Kansas and Missouri. That's an excellent book and field guide. Sibley's, Peterson's, flash guides, any of those are excellent resources to help guide you again for what's in your area and what you should be looking for. And I believe the previous class also kind of went over what to look for on the bird to help you identify it. For checklists, it helps kind of guide what you're looking for where you go. So a checklist, many of our local nature centers, the Arboretum, I believe, has one, bird stores, park headquarters offices, all of those should have birding checklists. I know Los Bluffs had one. So various places you go have them available online or at their visitor centers. And that gives you an idea of what to look for. We're in a really unique area for bird watching, even in your own backyard, because we get to experience massive migrations as the seasons change. We're right in the central flyway, and our yard birds can vary greatly from season to season. So it's kind of exciting to watch. Can't get the slide to move, Juju. There we go. Here you've got, we missed the whole thing on binoculars. You need to go back. Binoculars, resources on that, and I'm getting ahead of myself here. Help. Juju.
Try using your arrow keys to go backwards. Because you're going forwards right now.
I'm going the wrong way. There we go.
Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah. All right. Now we're back in business. Binoculars. Sorry about that. Binoculars are touchy. If you haven't tried out a pair of binoculars before you order it online, you should physically get your hands on a pair and put them in your hand and try them. Make sure it's the right weight, make sure it's the right size, because whatever you order, if you're ordering online or just try them without trying them or buy them without trying them, could be too heavy. It could be too, the magnification could be that it doesn't work with your eyes and your steadiness. You have to have the ability to have steady arms on some to make them clear. Try out the pair in person. There is a great resource Audubon has, and I believe Juju has that link. It's a binocular guide on Audubon. Make sure they're anti-fog, and those with a no questions lifetime warranty are really awesome. To help you, a crisscross back strap helps keep the weight off your neck, because if it's hanging off your neck all the time and you're out there walking and looking at birds, it can get pretty heavy. Backyard bird habitat, urbanization, and agricultural development equals our loss of natural habitats, which includes our grasslands, our wetlands, and our woodlands. Our vacuumed and sanitized suburban lawns and yards have created a wasteland for birds, pollinators, and wildlife. We choose ornamentals that are pretty, but not functional. They're typically introduced species that were brought here for their beauty, but they don't sustain anything. They're natives in other countries, not ours. So plants that a lot of us have, like azaleas, privets, crepe myrtles, Japanese maples, boxwoods, barberries, forsythias, you can go on and on. Our local insects that have evolved here don't feed on alien plant species, which means the birds won't have as many insects to eat either. When you feed and subsidize the birds with food during the winter months, but you don't offer them a protein-rich insect environment in the summer months, it kind of doesn't complete the cycle. They need the insects to raise their babies. The insects need the plants, the proper plants. When you strip your yard of available organic material that insects take cover in and that birds use as construction materials for their nest builds, you take away the building blocks to sustain those birds in their worlds. So when you're raking up all those leaves and pine needles and everything that's gathered up everywhere and you're hauling it out of your yard and out of your environment, it's sanitizing your yard to the point where there's not enough resources for many of those birds. And that's happening everywhere, in addition to all the building and clearing. Their habitat is just disappearing. Talks about maximum reproductive success and maintenance of biodiversity. They need nesting materials. They need nesting places. Old wood, many birds nest in old trees. If you take out those old dead trees or trees that have holes in them, they don't have a natural nest cave. Maintenance of biodiversity, when you're stripping it down to just the sanitized version, you don't have the whole cycle. The cycle's broken. Vertical elements and edge effects refers to things like short, squatty bushes, tall perches for your birds. They like, some of them like to hang out up high, some like to hang out down low. So you got to mix up how you plant your yards and create places where they can fly from a high perch to a low area to get down to forage and make them so they're comfortable in their path. Those vertical elements help. Get some goldfinches on some natives and some non-natives. Hummingbird, your cardinal, your Cooper's hawk. All these birds are in our yards often. I want to talk about bird food. Certain birds have certain favorites, and many of you probably know this. Black oil sunflower and striped sunflower are favorites of cardinals, chickadees, finches, especially cardinals. A lot of birds like to sit and spit, like your cardinals and doves. They also like a wider dinner table. So that kind of changes up what kind of feeder you use. And we're going to talk about feeders after the food. Black oil happens to be superior to other foods for most species just because it is very high in oil content. The black striped sunflower is most all the birds will like, but titmice and blue jays, it's their preference. They like the stripy over the black oil. That's the black striped. There's a gray striped sunflower too, but most species don't like that one as well as the other two. Many times you're going to find mixes that kind of mix the stripy with the black, with the safflower, with the lots of other things. The shelled sunflower mixes, that means your shell, your black oil, your stripy shell, that coating on the outside of it has been taken off. costs more per pound, but there's no mess. It's also really convenient if you want to put your feeder, say, over a garden or over a patio or over a deck, and you don't want that shell residue on the ground. It's clean. Everything is edible. It can't grow. And it's usually called shelled or no mess or patio blend. Depends on where you get it. Safflower is a very nutritious choice. It also has a very, very tough outer shell. Squirrels are reputed to not be fond of it, although some are. Grackles and starlings don't like it, but cardinals and rose-breasted grosbeaks love it. Your doves love it. Your native sparrows love it. Chickadees, you'll often see them grab a little kernel and then go to a tree branch and bang it on the branch and break it open and eat it. Niger or thistle. A lot of you see those little bright goldfinches. They love that. Challenge with Niger is it needs to be really fresh. It's a teeny tiny little black oil seed. It's very high in fat and protein, has a thin husk, but if it's not fresh, the birds won't eat it. The fresh Niger should have a nutty aroma. It should smell a little bit nutty. It should be black and shiny. Don't buy more than they're going to consume in a month on that one. And you could always keep it in the freezer or fridge if they slow down on eating, and that kind of keeps it fresher, just like your own personal nuts and baked goods. If you don't use it fast enough, you freeze it. That helps keep it fresher. It's commonly called thistle, but it is not the thistle you see growing in fields and along the roads. It's not going to start a thistle patch in you or your neighbor's yard. It's from an African yellow daisy called Guzoita abyssinica. It's not even from here naturally. It's usually heat sterilized, so it will not germinate before it is imported into our country. It primarily was grown in India, Ethiopia, Nepal, and Myanmar. And you might think the birds aren't eating it if you see some of it on the ground. But if you take a closer look, you're probably going to see the little shells on the ground, little tiny husks. If the seed gets wet or moldy, it should be discarded. The feeder should be cleaned with a 10% bleach to water solution and thoroughly dried before refilling it. It says common red poles require a special feeder for Niger or thistle, and it's a mesh feeder that they can cling to, and they come as a big large flock if you're lucky to get them in your yard, and then they just cover that thing just by clinging to it. Millet is a tiny little seed, often confused with milo, which is a filler seed, which you don't really want in your songbird mixes, but it is milo is a common filler that songbirds don't eat. Millet is a good ingredient that your smaller little birds love, specifically your juncos. A lot of time you'll see those in the winter, scratching around and eating it. Indigo buntings, when they come through here in the spring, and if you have them in your area, they love millet. A lot of your little songbirds that like to scritch and scratch like those. That would be a rose-breasted grosbeak, come through in the spring. That's one of the ones we're lucky to get in the spring. And if you happen to hang on to some safflower, they love safflower on a wide tray or big platform feeder. That's a male rose-breasted grosbeak. Shelled peanuts and peanut hearts. Your blue jays, you've probably seen them. They'll grab as many as they can. Chickadees, nuthatches, titmice. You don't want to use salted peanuts. Nothing with coating. Salted peanuts, not good for us. It's really not necessary for the birds. The peanuts should be fresh, and you need to watch them for moisture and mold. If they decay, there's a fungus that can get on those peanuts called, it carries an aflatoxin, which is not good for humans or birds. So make sure your peanuts are dry and fresh. Whole peanuts in the shell are a favorite of jays, grackles, crows, and some woodpeckers. They're going to take those and do what's called caching for later. They will take them and stash them up on a tree branch up high or someplace. And a lot of times I've watched a downy woodpecker take peanuts, go stash it, tuck it away in a tree somewhere, And as he's busy going to get more peanuts, there's another red-bellied woodpecker coming behind, stealing the peanuts that he cached up in the tree trunk. So they think they're hiding them away for later, but it doesn't always work out. Peanuts out of the shell or broken up peanuts are better for your chickadees, titmice, and nuthatches. They're littler pieces. They're easier for them to navigate with because they're such little birds. The chickadees grab them with their little feet, beat them on a branch into smaller little pieces and gobble them up. Bird seed mixes are not a bad thing, but you need to make sure your bird seed mixes are fresh. Like I said earlier, if it's got milo, that is not something your songbirds eat. That is something game birds like pheasants and grouse and turkeys like. Wheat, oats, rye seed, again, songbirds are not real fond of those things. And if they're in your mixes, that's a filler item and you're paying for something that's just going to get tossed out on the ground and spoil. Check your birdseed mix and make sure it doesn't have an expiration date stamped on it. If it does, it could have been kept in a warehouse for quite some time, could have been autoclaved, which means heat sterilized and cooked. It's just better to get fresh, just like we buy our fresh produce fresh. Nuts and seeds have oil in them, and over time that oil can depreciate and then your nutritional value goes down. Cracked corn is an inexpensive way to feed the birds. A lot of people get it for ducks, but it can be messy if it's allowed to stay on the ground and spoil and mold. And you just need to avoid that. Suet is a big attractor, especially in the cold time, and it's a very valuable source of energy when it's cold. Usually you need a different kind of feeder for that, but suet now is not just the little square cakes that you see. It can also be in little balls. It can be in a spread. There's a lot of different forms. You can make your own suet, and I believe there's some recipes Juju has a link for that were even on our extension website that are good recipes for homemade suet. Birds in the cold, that extra fat really gives them enough energy to stay warm. So it's a really good resource for them. It's also an excellent source of food. A lot of people believe suet should only be fed in the winter months. And it is easier to feed in the winter months a lot of times because of its consistency. But if you make a suet that has more cornmeal and filler binders in it, then it can also be served in the spring and summer as long as it doesn't get above 90. And it's an excellent source of nutrition for the mama birds and dad birds to bring to the babies because it's quick, it's accessible. They can grab it and not waste as much time hunting insects, or if insects aren't as available in your area, the suet helps get them over that hump and get the energy for these babies and get these babies growing up. Fruit for berry-eating birds. You can provide fruit. The easiest way is to grow it on your trees and bushes. But if you can't do that, you can do things like rehydrated raisins and cranberries, not sweetened. They have to be unsweetened. Diced apples and juniper berries. I have fed all of those things in the winter months mixed in with suets to my bluebirds and mockingbirds and birds like that. Waxwings, bluebirds, mockingbirds, robins, any of your thrushes, they all love fruit. Orioles, we're just getting ready to come into Oriole season here. And it's one of my favorite seasons for bird migration. I always hear them before I see them, and I know to get my grape jelly served up outside and my orange slices because they're such a treat to watch. They come up from Central America, South America. They come in force about third week of April to about Mother's Day. It kind of varies depending on the weather systems. And they come in force and they just love the grape jelly and oranges. They'll also eat mealworms. And mealworms are a larval form of a beetle that is completely harmless, that your orioles will eat, your bluebirds will eat, titmice, sparrows, chickadees, wrens, almost every bird out there will gobble up those mealworms except for finches. Goldfinches are vegetarian birds. They're not going to eat your mealworms. They're bluebirds' favorite kryptonite. They've got me trained to deliver my mealworms promptly, or they'll stare at me in the windows. Wrens as well, favorite of them. Chickadees, they all love them. The downside is everybody loves them, even your bully birds, and you might need a special feeder to keep those bigger birds out. And a caged feeder works the best for me. My favorite is the Irva bluebird feeder. And it's just a blue round cage that the bluebirds go in and out of, and your little birds go in and out of, but your big birds cannot. They'll cling all over it, they'll jump all over it, but they can't get in there and they can't clean out the mealworms. A lot of you probably remember that really cold winter, was it year before last, where it got so cold in February, and it was closely followed that Texas ice storm. And we had a huge fallout here of robins that had been pushed up from the south, and they came up here and they were just thick everywhere, and they were freezing and they were hungry. And mealworms to them that just saved a lot of them, plus diced up fruit. So anytime you can do anything like that, when the weather gets nasty, it's very helpful to those birds. Here you can see a male bluebird. He's got his mealworms. Oriole with an orange, and the cardinal on some berries. This is a list of all those foods we were talking about. I don't know if Juju will be able to have that available for you, but it kind of tells you which birds like what food the most and how to deliver that food. Certain foods kind of require different dining buffet platforms. The easy foods are things like sunflower seeds, shelled sunflower seeds, safflower seeds. All of those will feed in about any feeder except a finch feeder. The finch food, which is the Niger in the finch food, is little teeny tiny, and if you put it in normal feeders, it will run right out. So it has to go into a feeder with smaller ports, finch feeder specific, or a mesh feeder designed specifically for Niger, which we'll get into here. But this is just kind of a who likes what. You get into feeders, platform feeders. That is a big favorite of large-bodied birds. So your cardinals and doves, all the songbirds like a platform feeder because it's easy for them to land, to look around. They can see what's coming. Big dining table. It's also a really fun place to feed things like safflower and black oil if it has a nice edge on it, because they'll do their sit and spit a lot of times, and they'll shell out the seed and leave a lot of the shell there. Not all of it, but a lot of it. So that kind of helps keep your ground under it clean. The drawback is it doesn't really have a cover. Unless you can add a roof over it or some sort of hanging cover, it can be quite exposed to the weather. A hopper feeder, that is kind of like a large house, typically, with a ledge around it for the birds to sit on. It does protect the seed from the weather because it's in an enclosed, the house part. Both of those feeders, the platform feeder and the hopper feeders, can be somewhat susceptible to squirrels if the squirrels can access them, because it gives them an easy place to sit right in that center of that feeder and gobble up your food. Tube feeders keep your food dry because they're covered, it's protected. A lot of them have good capacity, so you don't have to fill it as much. Depending on your feeding ports and your perches, kind of varies in the bird mix on that feeder. So if you kind of want to sort out and not have big birds at a feeder, a tube feeder with smaller perches helps keep your big birds off, especially if you don't add a tray to it. If you add a tray to that same feeder, that adds a wider dining table or platform, and then your bigger birds are welcome. There's also feeders that are weight sensitive, that you can adjust the weight on them, and that keeps big flocks of bully birds like starlings and grackles, or if you don't care for blue jays, it can kind of exclude most of those birds. but still allow your little birds to eat. Niger and thistle seed feeders are the ones for that finch food that have teeny tiny holes and access just for the finches and your redpolls and your pine siskins. Also, some of your little woodpeckers can eat out of there because they have long tongues that can reach in those little holes and lap out the food. Not many other birds can get in there other than those, though. Flickers will try, and a big flicker on a little finch feeder is something to see. There's also fun finch feeders, there's upside down finch feeders where the finches all kind of got to hang upside down to eat on it. And those are very entertaining. Where do I put my feeders? You want to be able to watch them because that's the fun part. You should be able to see it. You want them within 10 to 15 feet of cover, such as trees and shrubs, if possible. So the birds, if they're spooked off by a hawk or an owl or a predator of some sort, or just something, they have a place to go where they feel safe quickly. And also a place where they can sit and kind of survey the feeders before they come eat, so they can swoop into the feeder after they feel safe. You want the feeders at least 10 feet from where squirrels can jump, because squirrels have a very long horizontal jump and a very high vertical jump. They're crafty. Hanging feeders from trees is a real tough battle with the squirrels. You'll constantly be fighting squirrels and or raccoons unless you can hang it on a very fine wire that they cannot get down, or be very super creative. And if you're that creative, you could probably patent it, because squirrels are many people's nemesis in their yards when they feed birds. Some people use a hot pepper deterrent in the food. That can help, but just your regular cayenne it's not hot enough. It's got to be a lot hotter. You want to place the feeders within 2 to 3 feet from the house and outside that 10-foot range, because, and this says 30 feet, but you can go out 10 to 30 feet out. That way, when the birds are spooked, if they swoop up, they can avoid collisions with the windows that can do damage. If they're in that sweet spot of outside of a couple 3 feet and inside 10 feet, and they hit the windows, they can cause damage to themselves. There is a decal that you can put on the window that is an ultraviolet reflective to the birds. They see an ultraviolet light that we can't see, so to them it glows. So that helps them veer up. You can do cross grids with tape. There's a lot of things on the internet you can look up to find out how to keep them from running into your windows. Squirrel baffles, that is the tilting squirrel baffle is a thing you put above your feeder that when the squirrel comes down the rope or the bungee or the chain or whatever you have your feeder hook hanging on the tree from, he'll get on top of that and his weight will tilt it enough where he's tipped off and he's launched on the ground. Some squirrels get crafty, and as it tips them, they jump up under and land on your feeder anyway. So you just kind of got to figure out sweet spot on where that's going to be. Non-tilting baffles, if you have a pole that's in the ground, a non-tilting baffle is usually a metal, looks like a big can that hangs on the pole, that the top is at least 5 feet up. So the squirrels can't use it as a stepping stone to get up the pole to the feeder. There are also squirrel-proof tube feeders that have that weight sensitivity that adjusts. So then when they jump up and hang from the bottom of the feeder, it shuts the food off and they can't get on it. Those are magic. Unless it's a raccoon who can get in it and tear it down. Then you have a whole nother problem. Here you've got an upside down suet feeder with a downy woodpecker on it. The one with the blue jay is a hopper feeder with a kind of an extended tray. The one with the nuthatch, the green feeder there, that you can see part of a baffle under that. That's a metal can baffle on a pole that when the squirrel or critter tries to run up the pole to get to the feeder, He gets up inside that can, lights out, he can't see, he goes back down. He can't jump over, up on top of it, as long as it's above that 5 to 6 foot range. And that feeder there is a hopper feeder that self-feeds the food and has a little wider platform for your birds to sit on, but not a big tray. The one with the flicker is called an eliminator feeder, and that one has a weight-sensitive spring on that ring. When the birds perch on it, the weight goes down and shuts off the ports, and you can adjust that tension to fine-tune it for which kind of birds you want on that feeder. Here's the eliminator a couple more times. You can see you get quite a few small birds on it. If you look back at the flicker picture, the ports are half closed because of his weight, but he's figured out how to outsmart it, still hang on it, reach around there, and still get out some goodies. And here you see the wren doesn't move the wheel. He doesn't move it at all. Keeps the food nice and dry in the snow, and the bird can eat. Water is critical year-round, not only for drinking, but nest building, cooling, feather maintenance. It's important for all of those. Winter water is just as important as summer water. By offering water consistent and dependably, it's the simplest and most important step you can take to increase the bird variety in your yard. I think in my yard, it contributes to my success with bluebirds because they, in the winter, are drawn because I heat the water and they can come get fresh water all year round and they know it. And on the coldest, nastiest, stormiest winter days, the bluebirds will line up on that bird bath and drink. Birds have to be ready to fly at all times. Bathing is a critical part of their feather maintenance and helping them stay in top flight condition. They preen, and that is a way of the birds grooming their feathers that removes the dust, dirt, and parasites and aligns each feather in the best position with their body and other feathers. They do this multiple times per day, and you've probably seen them sitting on a branch in the morning after they take a dip in the bird bath maybe, and they'll tuck their head and they'll start grabbing a wing and just pulling at each individual wing. They'll splash around in those bird baths and thoroughly loosen and remove the dust, dirt, and parasites before they start preening. And it's just as important in the winter as in the summer. Clean feathers offer better insulation for them in the cold, and they're warmer. So when they're dunking in that bird bath in the winter, they aren't going to freeze. It's not going to freeze to them. Their body core temperature is quite warm. It just cleans them up, helps them feel better, fluffs those feathers better, and gives them better insulation. Water is also equally important when it's hot, and a bird's ability to regulate its body temperature can become quite stressed. You might see them sitting in a bird bath or a puddle on a really hot day, and their beaks are kind of open a little bit, and they're just trying to cool off. Water can be offered many different ways: on the ground, in a pedestal base water bird bath, fountains, ponds, misters. Fountains and misters, bubblers are favorites of birds. They are drawn to the sound of moving water. They like moving water. You usually see a lot of birds along a stream or a creek. It draws them, kind of like it draws people. They enjoy that. Misters, hummingbirds love misters. It's a favorite way to have them play and dance in the water, as if you've got a little mister spraying around. You want to make sure you put the bird bath so it has an open area around it where predators, if you have yard cats or anything else, that aren't going to lie in wait and snatch the bird as it's trying to drink. You want it in the open so nobody's hanging out under the bushes looking to jump and grab whatever's trying to get a drink. You want access to it so you can clean it. Access close to a hose so you can hose it off or fill it. You won't have to haul a bucket then. You do need to dump out the water often, especially if you've got a lot of big birds like robins that are in there bathing quite a bit. They seem to be very messy and very dirty. Certain times of year, the bird baths get a lot dirtier than others. Out of the direct sun in the summer helps keep the algae down. And if the water's not as warm, the algae won't grow as fast. If you have an old concrete bird bath, a lot of times those can get real porous. And in those little pits and crannies and cracks, you get spores for the algae and molds and things. And it's very difficult to keep those from repeating, growing that stuff back unless you keep that really clean. You don't want to use a lot of soap or any soap in a bird bath, and a very, very, very light bleach solution, and in the full sun dry before you refill that thing, and make sure it's really rinsed well. You can always add a bird bath heater in the winter. That keeps your water open. There's a lot of different bird bath heaters out there. There's also bird baths that are sold that have a thermostat and heater integrated into it. That helps keep the water open, is thermostatically controlled most of the time, so it turns itself on when it gets below freezing and off when it's warmer, and you don't have to worry about it. The big thing there is they aren't solar usually. You do have to run power and run an extension cord. For depth, they shouldn't be too deep, but if you have a really deep, one of the older bird baths tends to be deeper. I usually like to put a rock in it, big stone, or a log, little piece of wood. Then the birds that don't want it so deep can stand up on that and get a drink. That also kind of helps if I don't want robins or starlings or grackles to splash around in there too much and get the water too dirty and nasty. If I put something in the middle, that deters that a little bit because they just don't have the freedom to splash around like they want to. Now, when I spoke about the moving water and the misters and the fountains and the bubblers that the bird loves, they like constant dripping. So that again adds to that moving water. We already talked about removing algae. Keeping your water moving keeps mosquitoes from laying eggs. So mosquitoes will only lay eggs in standing water. And if you have there's something called a water wiggler that just sits in the bird bath all summer and just stirs the water around, keeps it moving. Mosquitoes can't lay eggs in it. But you should be dumping out your water more than the entire summer, or it is evaporating. So the same water is not sitting there the whole time. Solar fountains is another solution to keep your water moving. The challenge with that is usually they're putting the water up in the air. And on a windy day, like we had today, any water going up the air is basically going to evaporate or fly out of the bowl, and you're going to run dry. Another way to prevent icing in the winter, if you don't want to invest in a heated bird bath, they sell heated dog water bowls. Those are smaller. They keep the water open just like a bird bath and serve the same purpose. And you have a small little unit out there just for your birds to drink out of. Mud bath is kind of like a muddy area in your yard where they can kind of, get some mud. If you've got barn swallows, cliff swallows, things like that like to use mud in their nests, a little muddy spot is a nice place for them to get that. Here's a little dog bowl that's open, most of them, and you can see the birds are drinking out of it. It's right up there on the deck rail. Got your flicker, a pair of cardinals, sparrow, and that is a goldfinch in winter plumage on the lower right. Your summer. This was a heated bird bath unit on the lower green picture there. That is a heated bird bath, but in the same stand can interchange a bowl for summer months. And that has a bubbler. It looks like a rock, and it just bubbles the water and moves the water. And you can see a whole flock of sparrows splashing around in there, and a cardinal as well, just going to town. Natural shelter. Bird-friendly landscape is one that offers different layers of plants for different birds to use. So dense areas, loose areas, roosting areas, nesting areas. You want to plant with variety. And not only variety in plants, but variety in height, variety in location, little clusters in proximity to where you're going to put your feeders. independent beds that have different layers of vegetation. So maybe some foliage, maybe some flowers, maybe some bushes with some berries. You know, the variety that you can do is endless and completely dependent upon your yard and your situation and your sun or shade. But the key is variety. Different birds like different types of shrubs, trees, and grasses. Some birds like to scritch and scratch in the leaf litter. Some birds like to have a lookout perch. Some birds are more comfortable in, say, a crabapple tree or a redbud. That's just some, if you sit and watch in your yard, just kind of watch which birds hang out where. And you'll see there's certain birds definitely prefer some things over others. A bird-friendly landscape does not need to be perfectly manicured. So leaf litter, small brush piles, that provides insects, nesting materials, and shelter. So that goes back to that when you sanitize and what I call vacuum your yard, you're taking away the materials that the birds and insects need for synergy and to, you know, integrate with each other. If you have trees in your backyard, leave a dead limb for a hole. As long as it's not hanging over your house, you might get a nest in there and be fun to watch. Let some flowers and shrubs go to seed. Don't cut back the plants that die in the winter. A lot of times those stems are places that provide invaluable habitat to many of our pollinators as they overwinter. So if you totally chop those down in the fall and clean it up, or chop them out your first warm day in the spring before we've gotten 50 degrees consistently, you're taking away potentially places where pollinators will nest, taking away places where your insects hang out and provide food for the birds. Leaves also can provide great mulch. They provide great habitat for insects like our firefly larvae. Fireflies prefer moist soils and deposit their eggs under mulch or leaf litter. I remember seeing fireflies many, many, many years ago in force in my suburban neighborhood, but now not so much. And it's because there's just not as much natural habitat for them. There's just not as much bugs as there used to be. Leave the stems and seed heads over winter for architectural interest in your garden and for the birds. It's pretty to look at that with the frost on it. And when it's snowing and when there's nothing out there, it can add some interest. And plus you might see some birds on the seed heads foraging. Here's little wren. He's scritching and scratching in the leaf litter, picking up spiders, I bet. Thorny, densely branched trees and shrubs can provide excellent shelter. So things like dogwoods, barberry, cotoneaster, flowering quince, hollies, forsythias. Those are all tightly branched, compact things that birds can take cover in. If, say, a Cooper's hawk or something strafes them in the yard, up in the feeder, they can get down in that. They can also take cover in those on a rainy day, like, you know, cold, nasty, rainy, snowy day. That provides protection. Evergreens provide a lot of shelter during the winter. The birds tuck up in there and they're pretty sheltered. And some of them have berries and seeds. I believe your eastern red cedar is an excellent shelter, provides blue fruits on the female trees, which are a favorite of cedar waxwings. Minimize the insecticides in your yard. Bugs are a great food source for birds. I can't tell you how many times I've had a bug guy come knock on my door. I don't know which ones. And the first question I ask them is, what chemicals do you use and how did they affect the birds? Because I don't use any of those. And the insect people are always shocked that I ask the questions and they don't really have an answer either. Here you've got some cardinals. You can see them up in the dense cover up there. It's a junco on an evergreen. house finch also in the evergreen area there. So they're all taking shelter and protected. A little nuthatch, goldfinch, junco. That goldfinch is going after those seed heads that were left. There's still some, looks like redbud seeds on there on the junco and woodpecker tree. For bird houses. So birds need houses for various things. They need them for shelter and they need them for nesting sites. I believe we have some links on appropriate bird houses and how to build them, a lot of resources on them that Juju's going to drop in the chat for you. House and hole size, as well as placement, can make a difference on which birds you attract and retain for their families. Different birds have specific needs on size of hole, size of house, the location of the house, all of that. And I think it was Nest Watch is probably one of the links that Juju's going to drop in there that gives you specific size dimensions for each bird that you might want to attract. And I think it also gives you detailed plans on how to build houses if you're so inclined. You want to avoid cheap, decorative, pretty houses. Most of the time, they're very difficult to clean out, if at all. And it's very important to clean out the old nests. If you can't get your hand in there or lift up a roof or open the back to clean it out, it's like a one and done, because you don't want the birds to continue to build on top of old nests. You don't want them to get too hot. Birdhouses require ventilation. They require some drainage. They should have a rough interior where the fledglings are going to climb out. So if you've got a real cute porcelain birdhouse, the babies are not going to be able to grip on that to get to the hole. So they're not going to have the strength they need to fledge properly to give them the best advantage. When you have an appropriate birdhouse, you need to monitor and maintain them. So that means by monitoring, that means kind of watching and seeing what's going on, making sure you don't have any predators, making sure it's in good condition, it's not dirty, there's not a bee's nest or hornet's nest, or that the ants haven't taken it over. Like I said, that Nest Watch link gives you detailed instructions on each individual birdhouse, on how to become a birdhouse builder for each house. It's a birdhouse at Sunset. That happens to be a bluebird house in my yard. And you have a nest, birdhouse in your yard and a nest, you might get some babies. And this is a nest of baby chickadees. There's 5 little ones in there. And you can see how pretty their nest is. It's moss, fluff, and feathers that these chickadees very meticulously built. Bluebird nest, you can see it's very neat and nice. In my yard, they use pine needles and grass, and starts out just a little pile, and then they just keep building on it, and then they meticulously wrap it into this beautiful little nest. And this mama on that picture is rolling the eggs with her feet, and she's got 5 little babies there. Yeah, she had 4 broods last summer in my yard. Hummingbirds. This is another one of my favorites, and most of us, and we just talked a little bit about hummingbirds in the chat before the talk. They are here. Time to get your feeders out after the storm. That south wind probably pushed a lot more up here. Typically when the first ones come through, they are the males. They're kind of staking out their area and they're checking out what's available. They do breed here in the Kansas City area. The most important thing about supplementing a hummingbird's diet with homemade nectar is to make sure that nectar is fresh. You don't want it to ferment. They won't drink it if it's bad, but they also will note that that's a bad flower or that's bad stuff, and they don't want it. So it's not going to be on their list as often. It should not be cloudy. The feeder should be clean with no black mold. That nectar should be clear so you can see if it goes bad. You don't want any red food coloring in it. The red food coloring is not good for us. We don't need it, neither do the hummingbirds. They don't like floaters like ants or bees in their beverage, and I don't either, so I get it. Change the nectar often in heat. Don't add that red dye. You can make your own, very easy. 1 part white sugar, 4 parts water. Do not use cane sugar, do not use honey, do not use anything other than white sugar, just plain white sugar. I boil my water, put the sugar in there, get it fully dissolved, cool it in the fridge, store it, fill my feeders. Every 3 days or so when it gets hot. And I use a little brush to scrub around the ports. There's a lot of pretty hummingbird feeders out there, but the pretty is more for us than the birds. My favorite types of feeders are the flying saucer thin ones that don't hold a lot of nectar, usually anywhere from 4 ounces, at the most 16 ounces. It's not a lot. It's not as much to throw away unless you have as many hummingbirds as they get down at the Ozarks or up in Colorado, which around here ours are too testy to have that many at once. You don't really need a feeder that holds 3 to 4 cups of nectar. It's not going to stay fresh, and then they won't drink it. So keep that nectar fresh and use less, and you might have better luck. Locate the feeders in shade near a window. You can plant red flowers around or use decoys. I've never had to use decoys. The hummingbirds find the nectar and they know where it is. If you have the feeder wars where one guy is just strafing everybody else and driving them off, hang your feeders in different places around the yard so somebody at least gets to have a drink while this guy's busy chasing somebody off over there. So I usually have them on different sides of the house or in different gardens, and that gives somebody a chance to eat. Most people don't realize that about 80% of a hummingbird's diet is teeny tiny insects and spiders. If you spray to eradicate every little bug and spider, you also eradicate what they need nutritionally for successful nesting. They need protein to feed the growing babies, and spider webs provide an essential nesting element. If you look at this picture of this mama hummingbird, you look really close, she's got spider web in her beak. She was gathering web a whole morning, and you can still see a little bit of web up on the chair there, and she was just wrapping it around her beak and flying back and forth as she was building a nest. That is an essential element to hummingbird nests because it expands as the babies expand, and they use it as a binder on their nest along with the moss, and they decorate those nests with lichens. So if you clean out all the spider webs, they don't have any nesting material. This is a nectar plant, a favorite nectar plant of hummingbirds. It happens to also be a native. It's one of my favorite ones. It's called cardinal lobelia. It's awesome to supplement your hummingbird nectar with native plants with nectar, because that way you don't have to worry about the hummingbirds if you go on a trip. They've got a natural source growing right there in your yard. They're going to hang out and partake. This particular plant, cardinal lobelia, grows probably from, I want to say, starts blooming into June, maybe mid-June in a good year. It goes all the way through August. And it is a prolific cedar. It spreads if you want it to spread, and it's a perennial. So it's one of my favorite ones and attracts awesome birds. Cardinal lobelia. Here you've got hummingbirds on container plants. So if you don't have a lot of room, you don't have to have a big garden, you can do container plants and attract these little guys. And you'll notice all those flowers that they're partaking of, this one, these guys, they're all kind of a tubular flower. Hummingbirds like a flower with a tube with the nectar. It fits their beak. It's just what they prefer. And those also happen to be in the oranges and reds family, but they will drink nectar out of any color flower that has what they want. That's the style of hummingbird feeder because it's flat, it doesn't hold a lot. And as you can see, that's not a hummingbird on that feeder, that's a little chickadee. And that chickadee thinks that that middle of that feeder is his personal drinking dish. You put water in the middle of there, the ants don't get in your nectar. because ants can't swim. So they come down that little handle, and then they can't get in the nectar. But your little songbirds like that water too, and it's their little private drinking fountain. Hummingbirds also like to have a little place where they can hang out and stretch, like the little guy in the lower right, or sit and survey their kingdom. They want some dead sticks. Some of you might hang up a hummingbird swing. You might see them on a perch somewhere, but they like to sit somewhere and watch what's going on and stretch and just kind of hang out. And that's what these little ones are doing. Here you can see this little guy drinking out of a blue salvia, and the one up on top is drinking out of a red salvia. Those are also both container plants. So again, if you don't have a big yard, if you don't have a lot of room, you can put things in containers and make the birds just as happy. Yeah, you don't have to completely make over your yard to attract your birds. Hanging plants or containers with the right plants can get you started. Just like you saw in some of those hummingbird photos, a lot of plants can be put in containers. I think there's a link Juju's going to drop in there about containers, natives that the birds enjoy. You can provide those elements that the birds need of food, water, and shelter by using trees, shrubs, and flowering plants. Select the plants that not only provide shelter, but fruits or seed for the best habitat development. So if you're planting a tree and you pick one that also fruits, then you've supplemented their diet, you've supplemented their shelter, you've given them many elements that they need. So it's an added plus plus. Select a variety of plants. Again, that variety keeps coming up. The more you mix things up and the more different types of things you can provide different nutritional foods during different seasons. It's especially important to select, if you're selecting flower plants, to select flowering plants that spread out their bloom times from spring through fall. Early spring and late summer going into fall are two of the times that are most lacking in most of our yards for our birds and our pollinators. There just doesn't seem to be as much promoted then, or we don't focus on it as much. That's a weird window for the birds and the pollinators. And anything we can do to help them during those seasons. You've got hummingbirds migrating back south from up north, and they need all those additional nectar sources to get back. And a lot of times there's not much for them. If it was a dry summer and we haven't watered, or if we let our gardens, dry up, they don't have what they need unless you're supplementing with nectar. And we can have hummingbirds migrating through here all the way through the end of October. I've had one in my yard as late as October 31st. So to supplement even after a frost with some nectar might be useful then. Avoid the temptation of larger blooms and double blossoms on your plants. Those hybrids are pretty, but they're not usually functional for pollinators like butterflies and hummingbirds to access the nectar. So the birds can't get to the nectar if the petals are too fluffy. So overlapping petals, tetraploid type things, they just can't get at the nectar and doesn't make as much nectar. A lot of them also don't set seeds for the seed-eating birds. They're just bred for that additional big flower and not the other features. The other features have been bred out, so it's not there. Reduce and eliminate, again, the use of pesticides and herbicides, because when you have those, you're killing the bugs. Herbicides, you're killing weeds, killing things like dandelions, violets, clovers, early things that, again, a lot of your pollinators like, the insects like, and the birds follow the insects. We've got some birds on some red buds and some, I think this might be a little zinnia, I'm not sure, little goldfinches eating the seeds. Provide berry producing plants with different flowering and berry producing seasons. And I think on a lot of these coming up, there's going to be a lot of links for sources of ideas of where you can find information. Berry producing plants, you need to spread out different flowering and berry producing seasons. So maybe a holly with a raspberry, or you get your raspberry fruits in the spring, but your holly's set in the fall. So do different, so your fruit is spread out. Chick rearing days, parent birds can get energy from sweet fruits such as blackberries, mulberries, and wild cherries. So specifically things like your cedar waxwings, your robins, your orioles. If you've ever gone by a mulberry tree in a state park or around any of our lakes in, I want to say early June, late May, when they're fruiting, if you hang around it long enough, you're going to see orioles, and they're just noshing on the berries and hauling them back to the nests. And orioles can nest here. Usually it's in state park areas or by old growth tree areas near bodies of water, but they can nest here. Fall migrants require fatty fruits such as flowering and pagoda dogwood, viburnum, elderberries, things like that. So I've often seen in November robins and cedar waxwings covering my dogwood and just cleaning it off. The berries are just gone. If the squirrels have left any, the birds clean it off. Winter birds need fruits that hang out for a while. So your winterberry and serviceberry are two trees, bushes that are extremely useful to plant in your landscape for the birds. Fragrant sumac and hawthorns are other ones. And as I said, there's some links that Juju, I think, is going to drop in there for you on lots of ideas of more specific trees and shrubs, because the list is very long. Native trees, shrubs, and plants have evolved with the local wildlife. They yield more berries and fruit than non-native plants because the symbiotic relationship between them and the environment over time has allowed them to produce and prolifically continue on. The new stuff was bred more for pretty, and a lot of new things have been bred to take out the fruiting part because a lot of people don't want the mess. So you might want a crab apple for the flowers, but you want it to be sterile because I don't want that fruit dropping around my yard. So you want to make sure if you're buying trees specifically for the fruit that you're going to get fruit. Native gardens are packed with caterpillars and other insects during the time when many birds are breeding. This just happens naturally. If you have oaks in your yard, oaks are a key source of caterpillars. Caterpillars feed many of the birds because it's soft, it's easy on the fledgling baby gullets, it's not damaging to them. The mom and dad get that bug and they can jam it down the baby's throat and not hurt them and sustain the babies. Chickadees can eat 6,000 to 9,000 caterpillars alone, just feeding one nest of babies. If you don't have those caterpillars around, you're not going to have your little chickadees in your nests. The native plants provide a better habitat for insect-eating birds than non-native plants. And that's because they have the bugs. They require less maintenance and care once established. They use less water. They have deeper root systems. They self-sow. They're just easier. They're not as finicky. They're not picky. They're easy. Some would say some could turn into weeds. Yes, sometimes you do have to go in there and cull them out, but you share them with your other garden and bird-loving friends and everybody's happy. This is a graphic from the National Wildlife Federation. It does show a little difference between some common natives on your right and some common imports that we all plant in our yards. And if you look at the root systems on difference on these guys, it's pretty substantial. Deep roots act as filters in the soil. They take carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, convert it to oxygen as the plants respire for us to breathe, and put it back into the ground as carbon. They have specialized leaves and flowers for our specific areas. They succeed where non-natives struggle. Especially now with our water, we're kind of dry lately in the whole Midwest Plains area. Natives help preserve the land, protect it from erosion, are more efficient at water use less water. These are all really positive things that I think we should probably be looking at. And in addition, they sustain insect life for the birds that surround us. Here you've got an oriole with an orange again, and this is a chickadee not eating berries, but he was plucking flower beds. So he clearly wanted some sort of vegetation to eat, so he decided to pick the flowers and eat them. I've seen him do it to sedums too as they bud up. They just pick the buds right off and eat it. There's a lot of great sources on the internet for native plant gardens. There are many, many, many. Juju has a lot of links to share with you. Some are local. Many are local, actually, and some are right from our own extension office. They are amazing, amazing resources. And there's some native plant finders by zip code to find plants for you. There's sources of native plant sales. There's just all kinds of things. So look for those links. I think you're going to like those. You can certify your yard as a certified wildlife habitat with the National Wildlife Federation. You can look that up. That's something I've done in my yard. Get an assortment of birds. Any questions? There's a lot of information.
And I will also be sending out those links in like one large resource sheet for you guys, because I know I was putting a lot of information into the chat for you. While you guys think about any additional questions you have, Heather, we did have a few come in the chat. Someone asked about feeders that attach to the window. Do you have any experience or recommendations on those? Are they effective?
It kind of depends on if you have small children that are going to run up to them. They can work. The challenge is what you're trying to attract on the feeder. If you're just trying to get little chickadees and wrens and little guys, they usually work fairly well. The biggest challenge on them is making them adhere to the window. And a little bit of olive oil on those suction cups helps that. I'd also keep the lights low and just not make any sudden movements toward the window until the birds get used to it. A lot of birds will get used to the people and the environment and just kind of, watch you. I can sit on my front porch now and the birds will scold me for a little bit, but they will come down eventually. So you just got to give it a little time.
I did go ahead and put that demographics survey in the chat if you guys wouldn't mind filling that out. We have a few more questions. So this one you kind of answered. Someone asked about the finch feeders where the hole is under the perch. So we did talk a little bit about ones that have that access. I'm not sure if they were asking if there's a different type that are effective, or which
there
one?
are different. Yeah, there's the upside down finch feeder, has it so they have to flip. There is your standard finch feeder, which the perch is kind of under the little tiny hole. There's mesh finch feeders, which are specifically for Niger and Niger alone, just because if you do a finch blend in those, a finch mix, usually that's a mix of Niger and sunflower finely ground, the hearts. The sunflower hearts can absorb moisture and not stay as fresh. So the mesh finch feeders are mostly specifically for straight Niger seed. There's also a lot of people commonly use finch socks. They're called. It's like a fabric tube that has Niger seed in it that the finches cling to and pull the seed out of the fine mesh. It's almost like an old white nylon. Sometimes they're different colors, and the finches can work the seed out. All of those are different ways to feed the finches.
Great. We also have a question, can birds eat black walnuts?
That's a good question. In the shell or out of the shell? I would guess out, but I don't know. We'll have to look into that.
Someone else, so that person said they would crush them.
Yeah, they're in, I think, when you buy the mixed nuts blends, there's every kind of nut in there. But I don't know. I've never personally fed them in my yard, so I'm not sure. We'll have to look into it.
Someone else was wondering what the name of the blue bird cage feeder that you like was.
Erva bluebird feeder, I believe. It's just ERVA. It's an amazing bluebird feeder, and it's the only one that has worked. I've tried every one on the market. And this one is the one they like and the one that works.
And obviously, as Master Naturalists in K-State Research and Extension, we're not endorsing any of these products, but we are giving you tried and true feedback on them. And that is Heather's personal recommendation. So I might be, someone else asked, where's the best place to buy a non-porous bird bath? So I guess I would rephrase that as, where are some options that you can find some of those non-porous bird baths?
Well, you can get a metal bird bath, and that will never pit or crack in the winter. Those are good standbys. Check, I don't know about maybe a farm supply store, a bird supply store, someplace like that. I love the porcelain ones just because they're beautiful, but they crack in the winter here. They're not practical, but it's a one and done. Unless you bring in the top every winter or tip it over. Concrete, again, you got to take the top off in the winter and it pits and gets porous. So my recommendation then is to avoid that as metal, or a plastic liner can work. It's not porous and it's easily cleaned. And I'd check bird supply, even a big saucer, large size from a garden supply store, properly placed, can act as a bird bath.
Great. Someone else has asked, do mosquito dunks hurt birds?
Yeah. I used to use them in my yard years ago, but I stopped. I don't know if they really hurt birds, but I don't want to use anything that's a chemical in anything the birds have any interaction with. And I think it says they're biological, but I stopped using them. I keep my water fresh and I keep it moving, and I don't have to do any chemical or any other type of additives to my bird baths.
Yeah, so someone asked what a mosquito dunk is.
It's a pellet of something that you put in the water that won't allow mosquito larvae to hatch. But I don't know what that is that's in it.
It's typically a natural bacterium, and it's supposed to be only lethal to like mosquito larvae and potentially maybe some other insects. But they are certified as safe for wildlife and birds according to the EPA and their packaging. So I would suggest on most of those things to just make sure you carefully read the packaging, because they have to clearly state what they're safe for, and what the proper use is. And then with any sort of thing, chemical, non-chemical, natural, or otherwise, we always recommend that you follow the label directions. You're, okay, so I want to ask if they eat mosquitoes.
Yes, they do. It's actually one of the favorite foods of hummingbirds.
Ah, okay. So this person lives in the South and has a lot of issues with clean water that moves still having mosquitoes in them.
Standing water. Yeah, standing water is the issue.
Okay. Well, I think that's all of our questions. Be looking for a hefty email from me with additional resources. Thank you all for attending. Thank you so much, Heather, for presenting. Excellent presentation. And if we put on any more presentations, you will probably see an email from us promoting that. So thanks again for spending your evening with us. Have a good week.